In today's episode, we are diving deep into the Enneagram with my dear friend and expert, Erin Baute, who's been in the game for over 14 years. Erin shares how she elevates the Enneagram by incorporating somatic experiencing, a transformative way to help people process trauma, stress, and emotional responses in their bodies. We explore how each Enneagram type uniquely deals with anger, disconnection, and fear, and how understanding these patterns can lead to profound personal growth. Get ready to discover the fascinating link between your personality type and your nervous system. If you're new here, you're listening to the How We Get Thru podcast, a place for you to feel connected through deep and meaningful conversations with healers from all over the world. I'm your host, Jen, a licensed therapist and founder and CEO of the How We Get Thru app, and my mission is to bring you affordable and diverse therapy resources to help you get through the hard stuff, all in one place and at your own pace. Welcome to the How We Get Thru community. Hello, and welcome back to the How We Get Thru podcast. We have another special guest, one of my dearest and oldest friends. Maybe not oldest, but it feels like we haven't seen each other in a decade. Erin Baute to the show.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. It's so fun to see you.
I know. I just love the connections you make in life. And then I'm like, Erin, come to the show. Hey, how are you doing? It feels like you can kind of just pick up where we left off.
Yeah. I think that's what alignment feels like to me, when you find people who are like aligned and sort of get you and let you be you, that you can just sort of dip in and out in a way where we have to mask less.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, beautifully said. Well, Erin, we're going to talk about the Enneagram today, but then also I wanted to talk to you about how you've been integrating so many different things with personality, somatic, all these other things that you're adding to the Enneagram. But let's start off just like with a brief explanation. I feel like the Enneagram is like, I was like, oh, it was really popular when I found it. That's how I remember that. I'm like, no, I don't think that's it, because you've been doing it years before that. But I do think it's gained popularity within the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, I've been working with the tool. This is my 14th year working with the tool. But I do think in the last 5 to 10 years, it gained a lot of popularity, and in a lot of way for two reasons. Christian culture, I think, really sort of amplified and heightened what we know and understand it as a tool for growth and embodiment. And then social media.
Yeah.
Because it is really fun to sort of tease and laugh at some of the stereotypical behaviors of type. And so I think those two things brought it to the forefront in a way that is really helpful. Because when I first started the tool, there's a credentialing body, but there's not this sort of mass popularity. And so we've got some pop culture pushing it forward. The downside to that is that it gets filtered and misused, but that's not unlike anything, right? I'm sure for you as a therapist, you can pop onto Instagram and see any wellness person spewing things, and you're like, oh my gosh, how much harm are you causing by what you're doing? So, it's all that sort of ethical stuff that we have to contend with in our fields of expertise. But I do appreciate that it is grown in popularity. It makes that work easier.
Yes. Yeah. You don't have to explain all that much. People listening to this episode probably have a good idea, or at least their type, which is important.
Yeah. I see less of the Ennea what?
Yes.
Like I did when I first started working with the tool, and now it's oh yeah, I think I'm a such and such type. And so it's a lot easier to talk about.
I was actually getting my hair done, which was why we had to reschedule multiple times, but maybe just one time. And the assistant was like, oh yeah, I have to do that. I just can't remember how to spell it. And I was like,
that's right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Because
I don't know who decided to make it the most complicated. And then of course it's in my email. So every time I write my email, I have to spell it out in my head.
Yeah. And don't mess that up. Yeah. So where did it kind of come from? Who created it?
That's a really great question. And And you'll see, so folks who are listening might have read different things in different books or heard different things. And so what I will say is the sort of father of the Enneagram is a gentleman named George Gurdjieff, who was a Russian philosopher in between like World War I and World War II. And he was really into this like sort of like cosmic, just a little more woo-woo in terms of what growth looked like compared to what was happening in traditional psychology around that time, right? Very like linear, very rigid when we think about Freud and some of the things that was happening in modern psychology. And so he just was this really stark contrast to that work. And Gurdjieff was really into the body. And so a lot of very early Enneagram work is rooted in dance. There's some really cool aspects of how it connects the body, the heart, and the mind in a way that we don't get in sort of the intellectualization of psychology. Gurdjieff is said to have appropriated a lot of aspects of the Enneagram from other Eastern traditions, Sufism, Taoism, Buddhism. There is a connection between all of these spiritual and religious teachings, these ancient wisdoms that sort of overlap with this idea of we fragment self as a human, and our journey in the human existence is back to our wholeness, right? And that's really what the Enneagram represents, is we fixate at a particular personality type, and that is my fragmented self. But as I grow and I'm embodied and I connect holistically to my mind, body, and heart, I can return to this fuller self. Now, as the Enneagram sort of made its way to Western ways of thinking, in like the 40s and 50s, it found its way to the psychology department at Stanford University. And that's really where it started to get its legs in the United States. We sort of stripped some of the body-based tools out of it and made it more intellectual. And that's a lot of what you see today, is that it's a very intellectual tool. We think and talk about the experiences of our type. We sort of sit in the behaviors, but we've lost a lot of the embodiment of it, which is why I have been working to add the somatic experiencing work for myself to just round the edges that isn't always easy to find or see or access in like what we see in the modern world of the Enneagram.
And what did that embodiment look like? Like, was that the dance, or was that like nervous system? Was that
So I'll answer it by telling you a little bit of how Gurdjieff worked in his schools.
Okay.
So he would take all of the great minds in Europe that wanted to come learn and study, and he would create these they were like estates, you know, these big homes where these thought leaders who obviously had a lot of money and privilege, right? Because you had to have that in order to be a learner. And you would come into these spaces, into these schools, and you had to earn your way into the intellectual circles by doing physical labor. And so he would have these wealthy aristocrats who are learning, like digging ditches and working the farmland and doing this physical labor to teach them to be embodied before they could come into the parlors where they were having this intellectual conversation. And then all of the rest of the spaces were very communal. They would eat together, they would spend time together, right? So it was very communal, very heart-centered, very about belonging. But it was like you earned your way into the intellectual stuff through the body work. And it was just sort of the core foundation of like, if you don't know how to be in your body, we aren't moving this forward. And so I think that to me is such a profound statement of like, oh yeah, the body is really the machine behind all of this, and the brain is just the conduit to sort of try and make sense of what's going on in the body, but it can't capture everything. And so today, in the Enneagram, we see some people doing the embodiment well, but it's really this idea of integrating what we learn into what we do. So that I'm sure that's the same with therapy, right? Because it's like I can sit and talk therapy and I can talk about something, but if I'm not going to go actually do the something and rumble with the experience of it, I'm not actually going to change the pattern in my nervous system at all.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. Again, I think it's when you take anything and you peel back the layers, like because I've known about the Enneagram and I've known you, and I'm like, what? This is wild, but it makes so much sense. And I feel that in my own experience of like, okay, I can do therapy, but where's the body and where's the spirit? And so again, these three things, how are we integrating all these three things, especially in the US? We feel very cut off a lot from body. And being a body type, that also doesn't make a lot of sense when I'm like, oh, I feel everything in here, or like, but I also then, how do I operate in a world where body isn't prioritized in either the learning or the healing or the conduit of entering into myself?
Right. I think what is so interesting for me in my somatic experiencing cohort, there's like, I think 40 or 50 of us. And I would say the vast majority of people in my cohort are therapists. And when they ask, us to do the work of like sensation and feeling in the body, there's a lot of trying to intellectualize it and arguing, and it's a really interesting space to be in. And I'm super grateful that my early career in behavior didn't indoctrinate me into some of that, because behavior change is so body-based, right? That I've actually had to learn the emotional tools of behavior change as I've grown and evolved. Whereas, and I have a really malleable nervous system, and I can be in those spaces really easily and like can be manipulated, and it's really awesome. And then I feel so deeply for how structured therapy is in such a way that makes it hard for folks to be in their body. And so that's just like a small sliver of what I think what the human condition is that it's just so much easier to be in our heads than to be in our bodies. And why tools only get us so far when we do that, you know?
Yeah, because we're not able to integrate it on that level of the body.
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little bit about somatic experiencing and what led you there? Like what it is if people don't know?
Yeah. So somatic experiencing is a foundational practice of learning how to move with and process out shock, stress, or trauma in the body, sort of those held experiences. And it's really sensation-based. Somatic Experiencing International, it was started by Peter Levine. He, like most white men in his field, got these tools from indigenous practices. So somatic experiencing is not new. He just sort of put edges around it in a way that psychology could use and to integrate into therapeutic practices. You can do somatic experiencing without therapy. I think it's a really beautiful intersection. But with somatic experiencing, we are working with sensation and the story of the body, not meaning, not emotion, and not thought or language. And so it's a way to sort of expand the capacity of the nervous system around the pain or shock or trauma and sort of help ourselves grow. I started on this journey because 4 years ago, I had my ankle fused, which and I was on bed rest for about 5 months. And I fixate at a very urgent Enneagram type. I'm a type 7. And so I have a very urgent nervous system. I have a lot of energy, and that almost killed me. And I needed something to help with it. And I just couldn't find good resources. And the more I dug and the more I looked, the more ethical I wanted this work to be, because so much of body-based practices are indigenous, tribal, they come from cultures of color. And so I wanted to get closer to that. And I found SEI, the Somatic Experiencing Institute, and it like all systems, it has its problems.
Yeah.
But it is really rooted in trying to do global healing work, and make it more accessible to the populations of the world that are hit harder than others, right? I'm sitting in a very privileged body, and so my suffering pales in comparison to, other places in the world. And so I appreciated the lens that they offered in that space and in doing that work. And it has really helped me manage my own nervous system as I relearn to walk. It took me like 18 months to be able to walk again. I am 4 years post-surgery with a 40% loss in my right leg. I have a permanent limp. It's as good as it gets, right? And it's genuinely my nervous system that has saved my life and allowed me to sort of like expand around it and find my own strength and acceptance and tolerance for, being almost 44 years old. And my kids are hilarious. They're like, hey, Mom, good thing dinosaurs aren't around because you'd get eaten. Like, you couldn't run away. And so it allows me to like be with the grief of that and be with the anger of that, and that I'm too young to have these kinds of things. Like I have learned to grow around it instead of letting that just be what defines me. And so that's what started it. And then like with everything, I was like, oh, this could be really helpful over here.
Yes. So talk to us how you have integrated the Enneagram and somatic experiencing, because I just think it's so unique.
So two things. As a behaviorist, right? Like I really, my work is in behavior change, and I've been working in like leadership behavior for a long time. We see behavior as a 3-part change. I have to change my thought habits, I have to change my emotional regulation, and I have to change my nervous system patterns in order to make change happen, right? And often in our world, we don't deal with the emotional or the physical aspects of change. We just deal with the thought parts of change. It's like, oh, I'm going to get this new planner and it's going to help me be more organized, or I'm going to buy these new tennis shoes and I'm going to start going to the gym, right? We just deal with these little aspects of change. And I was seeing in my work that where people were hitting a boundary and were unable to make change last was because it was in the body. And so if we can make space in the body and allow for my tolerance and discomfort around the transition that I'm going to experience, and I know how to regulate my emotions and be with them and process through them where they live in my body, and I know how to manage my thought habits and problem solve, I'm more likely to stay with it until I get to the other side. And so that's really how I started integrating, was I was really realizing this gap in my learning around behavior change and how I could fill that gap, and then getting really immersed in it, especially doing my dissertation for my PhD. I started to see some theoretical framework overlaps between Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So this understanding that our needs grow and they have to have these foundational components, and that personality and nervous system work lived in the same part of the triangle, right? It's the safety response. And personality is just the habits that my nervous system created to keep me safe at a young age. And so if I really want to move up into belonging and self-esteem and to be my best self, right, which is where change occurs, I really have to have this super solid sense of safety. And safety is a felt sense. It's a somatic sense more than it is a thought sense, right? Like I can know logically that I'm safe and still get an email from a coworker that makes me feel like I'm in danger, right?
Right.
Like Or
Yeah.
get the phone call like, hey, I need to talk to you. And it's like, oh my God, I'm in trouble or I'm going to get fired or whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
That's not logic. That's the body. And so I've been weaving together somatic experiencing and the coping aspects of personality to understand how might our each unique nervous systems look so that we can regulate in a way that is personalized to move up to that higher sense of self. Because you and me have very different needs, and that's okay. And I'm kind of tired of the wellness world that puts care on the individual and says, well, if journaling or morning pages in the morning don't work for you, then you just have to try harder, instead of, well, what if journaling and morning pages are hard for you because you've disassociated in your nervous system for so long, and connecting is actually dangerous, right? So we're actually causing so much harm by asking somebody to journal when they don't know how to hold their own thoughts, feelings, and needs, right? So teaching them to hold it first is way more ethical than forcing them into something. And so it gives that level of insight that I love. I just love.
Yeah, that's amazing. And have you seen, I mean, we're so different, but as far as the personalities, are you seeing trends as far as like type 1 typically has this nervous system or this sense of safety? Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely see patterns and trends, which is really fun. And also, Jen, I'm nerdy, so someday I'll do some research around it and publish it, and we'll get there, but my kids are still little and...
Yeah. Well, can you
yes,
kind of mention some of the things that you are seeing?
Yeah.
As far as that.
So I see in a lot of ways, like let's take the type 3 nervous system, which are those like doers or achievers, have really struggle in terms of the body when things aren't complete, right? When I'm not finishing something. And so what that looks like is a body that doesn't know how to do less, or a body that doesn't know how to rest, or a body that doesn't know how to just sit and be without doing the dishes and without, cleaning up and tidying or getting everything done on my to-do list. And then the shaming and the anxiety that comes from pushing beyond my capacity, right? And ignoring my body's needs is so common. So it creates this cycle of urgency and scarcity, right? There's not enough. I'm not enough. And so in those instances, to go from that high energy to quiet, slow, still grounding is so traumatic, right? It's too much, too soon, too fast. And so really starting to see like how we can use somatic experiencing to do high energy, high activity things, like VU breathing, which is just like more engaged, more activated, more feral sounds in the throats, right? More shaking, more dancing, like higher energy things, to then learn how to start pendulating the nervous system down a notch, down a notch, down a notch, where maybe eventually I can come here. Whereas someone who sits in like a nervous system in that like type 9, where my practice is cutting that off, right? Ignoring it, that when I try to go inward, that sort of panic of like, I don't know how to listen to my body. I don't know how to turn those feelings on. And so it's a slower, lighter experiencing around like reorienting, or just your feet on the earth, or some slower, deeper breaths or expansion, right? We're just trying to make a little more room in the body to turn it on, to try to bring it up, right? And so we can see that the ignoring self in a 9 feels more comfortable, right? And so that's what my nervous system says is safety, is ignoring self, whereas safety in a 3 is doing. And we're taking away both of those safety mechanisms when we're trying to regulate. And so at first it's pretty dangerous to the body. And I can see those patterns in all 9 types. It's so fascinating.
Are there, because the Enneagram's separated by like body, mind, heart, right? 3 types or 3 different sections out of the
that's
9. Right. Are you seeing a pattern with that, like it in the nervous system, or does it feel like, like a 7 has a different body type than?
I think it is unique enough by type because within, like, in the body types for you, the 8, 9s, and 1s are the spectrum of how I'm managing this core component of anger, right? And so a 9 in the body type learns to ignore their anger and to deny it and not have it, where a 1 learns to control it, right? Let me manage it. Let me get my arms around it because it's bad, and so I shouldn't have it. But if I'm ahead of it all the time, then I won't actually do this bad thing. Where an 8's like, I'm going to use my anger for like power, right? I'm going to put it all out there and I'm going to wield it. And so it's this spectrum. Now, a healthy embodiment says that I use all 3 of those things around anger, that I know when to pull back, I know when to manage, and I know when to push out. But as humans, we just sort of get really good at one of them.
Yeah. And repeat
so,
that over and over again.
Yeah. Until it's habit, we don't have to think about it. And so the work, like with the Enneagram, is to just expand out and have a malleable body that knows when it needs the big energy, when it needs smaller energy, right? And I have to be able to pendulate into all of those experiences and know that it's safe for me to hold them, for me to do that in the first place.
Can you go through 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, 7 in the same way you just did for the?
Yeah, absolutely. We did 8, 9, and 1 in the body types, and they're sort of managing anger. The 2s, 3s, and 4s are heart types, and they're managing disconnection. So how I feel around connection or disconnection. Disconnection is unsafe, right? And so just like the 8, 9, and 1, we get those same energetic things where one of them's repressing it, one of them's controlling it, one of them's pushing it out into the world. So for the 2s, 3s, and 4s, the 2 is the one controlling it. I'm going to control disconnection, and I'm going to be in control of disconnection by meeting your needs. If I take care of you, then I will be connected to you and I will be safe, right? Where the 3 sort of pushes it out and says, well, I have to earn connection. So I'm going to go do all the things so that I can earn it from you. Where the 4 says, well, I'm just going to go inward and I'm just going to believe that we're already disconnected, that there's just like, it's hopeless, we're already disconnected, and I'm just going to sort of pick at the wounds of this disconnection because that's safer, right? So you see that same energetic thing. Again, we want all 3 of these in our lives. We want to know how to do that and sort of lift outside of that box. For our head types, our 5, 6s, and 7s, we are managing our relationship to fear, right? And just like all of the others, we have that spectrum of the 6s who are controlling fear, right? I can control what I'm afraid of by being really certain. I'm going to get all the information. I'm going to ask all the questions. I'm going to poke all the holes. Like, I'm going to be sure, and then I'm not going to be afraid, right? Which is hilarious because that's not real life for any of us.
Yeah.
You have the 7s where I fixate who push out against fear. I'm not afraid. I'm just going to go grab the bull by the horns. I'm going to like take control of my life. I'm going to have all the options. And then I don't ever have to deal with the things that might make me afraid or feel trapped or stuck or whatever. And then you have the 5s who go inward and say, well, I'm just going to hold my fear. And if I hoard everything and I have all the information and all of the knowledge and all of the resources that I need, then there will be enough of me that I'll never be depleted and I'll be fine. So as long as I don't have to give anything to you, I'll be okay, right? And so each person sort of fixates in one of these dominant types, but the goal is the circle on the outside of the Enneagram says, but we have access to all of these things. And so what does it look like for us to practice getting into some of these other spaces? And that all takes expansion in the body, being able to hold what I love about these types and also what doesn't feel great.
It's like so much information and like in such a really good way, because I'm trying to think of my own experience as a 9, and I've said multiple times on this podcast about my anger and the shame, especially when it comes into parenting, and how I'm like trying to kind of break that loop.
Yeah.
But also I think it's been such a shadow part of me that I'm always just trying to cut it off as well. So I just loved that perspective of and I can see in my life where I've pushed where I need to push. It's like female rage, it's like I need to stand up for myself. And then there's times where I forgot the other ones, but control it. I need to manage it. I need to regulate it.
Yep.
And the third one,
where I repress it, right? Where it's like, this maybe isn't something I need right now, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which I think is, again, as a 9, that is the unworking of that, of like identifying it, because it leaks out sideways for me. And then it becomes like not great and fun in the world. And it doesn't serve that purpose that I actually wanted it to. So it feels like this indirect way of kind of releasing this anger without it being those like 3 very specific uses of anger.
Right. And to recognize that all 3 are healthy. I think as women especially, we are taught like that the bigness of anger or the boldness or the loudness or it being exposed is not good or not healthy or not feminine. And I think that's true for the experiences around shame and disconnection and fear, right? Like the overtly expressing just isn't held in our culture very well. I can't tell you how many people like in earlier parts of my life have told me to be smaller, right? You should care about that less, or you should do that less, right? Because it's just more comfortable for us to sit in the control or repressed states. And so I often have to remind people that our expression is this huge pendulum, right? It's messy. And so we're learning how to come over here and express fear, express disconnection, express, anger, whatever the feeling is. And it is teaching our body that we can hold it. And we actually need that big experience to be able to sort of pendulate back and find, space in the middle somewhere. As humans, we learn it backwards. We learn by going over. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but it definitely has been helpful for me as a mom. I'm doing far less damage to my children by having an emotional outburst that I repair from than by not showing them the full expression of emotion.
Yeah. Which is so true. And I do like to tell myself that. And then I go, am I just treating them? Am I like teaching them how to be in an abusive relationship where it's like, I'm going to like tour blah, blah, blah. And then, oh my gosh, baby, I'm so sorry. I mean, no. But I think that is that. How do I love all parts of myself, and how do I show that to my children in this expression? And again, bringing in the body and the somatic experience of like, how do I feel safe enough to express this in my body? And then also, I think, again, for me, the only thing I could speak to is like, how do I feel comfortable enough in the expression of it? And then like it's almost like it boomerangs back and then just shame, and like, how do I kind of transmute that part? How do I make that part feel different in my body? Because it's very quick. It is like volcano, 0 to 100. And so for me in that experience, there's cues before that, but when it's too late, it is just like, we're off.
Yeah. We experience a lot of that in our house around neurodiversity, right? My daughter's autistic and has ADHD. She's really impulsive, like violent impulsive. We have holes in doors, and Louis been diagnosed with ADHD, but his is like the typical, I struggle focusing, and this realization that like we've got some neurodiversity going in our our DNA. So like what's happening in me, what's happening in my husband, right? We're sort of learning all of this. And there's a lot of chaotic energy that will happen as we're figuring out how to be in these spaces. And so we have this sort of like core foundational commitment that it is okay to be mad. It is not okay to be mean. And that is the delineation. And so, yeah, if you need to like scream and be chaotic and like get all of that repressed energy out of your body because it's being stored up in a way that doesn't feel good or healthy, understanding the difference of doing that versus doing that on somebody else's shoulders or on somebody else's back. And I'm so proud of my 7 and 9-year-old who get that, who get the difference between being mad and being mean. And being mad is welcomed. Like it's righteous, liberating energy to be angry about things, not at the expense of other people.
Yeah. I love that. And as a 7, what does when you lose your shit, what does that look like for you?
It is starkly different depending on where I am with my nervous system. With a lot of practice, I hold my shit pretty well. But when I am not holding my shit pretty well, I will snap and it'll maybe look a little more like a 1. It's a little harsh and rigid and critical. The only person that gets that is my husband, poor guy. And his tolerance of that is like otherworldly. I think. Every once in a while, my kids will get a level of sharpness from me. That's when they know mom's real serious, so it doesn't happen a ton.
Yeah.
The other side, because I'm working so hard to like sort of contain it and not let the mean happen, I will sink into grief and sadness over this is really hard. And I'm struggling to hold it. I've really quit like using my thoughts as a way to harm myself because the world is hard enough as it is. I don't need help suffering. There's enough suffering.
Amen.
Like I don't need help with it. So I'm really like, this is hard. I make it really systemic, right? Like this is hard. It shouldn't be this hard. This isn't fair that it's this hard. It isn't fair that I have a disability. It isn't fair that my kids are neurodiverse in a world that doesn't welcome it, right? Like, and I can sort of put my anger out at things that make it more challenging without beating me up or beating the people around me up. That has really helped to sort of separate some of that self-loathing that was the old narrative.
Yeah. What number is your husband? What's his?
He's a 6.
A 6. Okay. How's that?
It's work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
They all are. All relationships
they all are.
Yeah.
They are. It's the hardest work I do. And I have learned and I've realized that the only work I can do is my work and lead and mentor my children because they are just little mirrors of my nervous system. And that has shifted how I feel about myself. That has shifted my capacity. That shifted my parenting. But it has left my poor husband kind of like in the dust a little bit because 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was doing my work and then trying to help him do his. And that's just not possible. And so he's working really, really hard to battle his own 6 demons of like not feeling good enough and, you know, all the things, but he's loyal if he's anything. And so he shows up and he tries and he does it. And that's about all I can ask is that we just keep, I guess, like rubbing our rough edges off of each other slowly.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's so many things that contribute to our nervous system, which is relationships, our kids. How does our job kind of go in that, impact us in there?
I think there's a couple of things that really play. I think number one is this idea that we use competence as a way to build confidence, right? We do our self-worth work inside out. And so oftentimes for us in a career, we spend so much time somewhere, we build all these habits around our skills and abilities that we believe that we are good because we do good work, right? And so our value system, our belief system, our self-worth are all tied to this, which is why it's probably hard for people to leave jobs. It's harder to get feedback. It's hard to make a mistake. But then it's also hard for us to be new at things because we're not actually building confidence. We're only building competence. And so you take away my competence, right? You put me in a different field, or you put me learning about myself or healing work. And it's like, oh man, I don't want to do that. That feels terrible.
Yeah.
And so I go back over here where all of my neural pathways are firing really fast, and it's really easy, and I don't have to fix anything or think anything or, work as hard at it. And so I do think in some aspects, the work that we do can keep us stuck if we aren't willing to learn new things in comfortable spaces so that we can learn new things in hard spaces.
Yeah, and I've seen that a couple times. I don't know. I mean, I personally like change. I'm okay. Let me try this. Let me try that. Let me try this. I mean, I'm still a therapist, but I've seen it in like a couple people around me. I think my daughter being one of them too. Like we're doing a new sport, and she's like, okay, I'll just do the practices, but I won't do the game after one practice, And it's that feeling of I can feel how nervous you are about doing something new because you like to come in and master things, and how good does that feel? Like you just know, and no one has to tell you anything. And she does not love feedback. She just has that energy, and I don't know what type she is, but she just wants to know right away. And another example is a friend like quit her job and then went to this other job for 4 months and felt like just not great at all, and then went back to the other job. And just again, that feeling of like there can be more for you when you're uncomfortable. Like that uncomfortableness is also a lesson, and it's not a bad thing, but it can feel bad. It can feel like, oh, I made the wrong choice here.
Right, because oftentimes that communicated discomfort coming from our nervous system saying, hey, in the past, this was actually unsafe for us. It was unsafe for us to be new at something, right? It was unsafe for us to be out of control. We don't get our needs met when we're not in control. And those habits, right, form our personality patterns and the behaviors. And so it really can feel hard to do the uncomfortable thing. And so I always really recommend people to make changes in their safest place first, right? So if you're like killing it at work, like how can you do something different in your competent spaces to sort of practice reacclimating to safety before you jump into the big scary thing, right? Because people who jump in really fast might not finish it.
Right.
Or people who never jump, right? So there's all these reasons that sort of get in our way. But yeah, I see it really often too, how the pattern can get in the way of growth and change, because growth and change is on the other side of like difficult transitions. And nobody likes to transition.
What about entrepreneurs? And is there a typical type that's an entrepreneur? And what the hell does their nervous system look like?
I am so lucky because those are a lot of the folks that I work with, and I have all types that I work with: 7s, 3s, 6s, 9s, 1s. I mean, you run the gamut. And so I think people find their way into entrepreneurship based on their gift, right? The skill, their level of competence. And then what we see as it relates to business is, where are the things that I get stuck at in my business operationally that are usually tied to those behaviors and those nervous system responses, right? People who struggle asking for business because they don't want to hear no because they don't know how to handle rejection, right? Or people who are changing their business model constantly because they don't know how to follow through and finish something and stay with it. So that's really where I can see the personality type fit in is in their operations and how they're running. Or there are people who...
Can you name that? Like, typically what you see?
Yeah.
Like a 1 would do this and blah, blah, blah.
Like what we might see is that a 1 might take a coaching seminar or learn from somebody and be like, this is the way I have to do it. And they're like squeezing themselves into the box, right? Or, you might get 2 who is really giving and service oriented and gives a lot of their stuff away and struggles to like ask for the money or take it in return, right? They might struggle actually making something fiscally responsible and providing financial security. You might have a 3 who struggles with letting anybody help them. I have to do it all, right? Or a 4 who has a hard time getting out of their own way, getting out of their own belief of their failure, and struggling to just do the thing with less attachment to it. I don't work with any type 5s who are entrepreneurs. That might be a thing, right? Yeah. There might be a pattern already there. I'm sure they're out there.
Been the mystery one, right? They just feel kind of like
pretty introverted. Like, I'm not going to share my resources, right? I'm going to sort of keep it all close to my vest. Where 6s are really looking for like an external authority, someone to tell them what to do, what's right, what's good. And so may struggle with making their own choices. And a lot of 7s that I see, especially in business, are just changing so quickly that their client base can't keep up. One time I'm doing this, then I'm decided I'm doing this, and then I'm over here doing this. I have a friend who is an Enneagram enthusiast, and she's like, I'm following this woman. I think she's a 7 because she's changed her business 3 times in the last 4 months. And she's like, I'm starting to get overwhelmed. I was like, you can unfollow. Like, yes. That is okay. Where 8s might struggle taking direction from somebody else, right? And so like, I know this is my way, or like sharing in the decision-making process. And a lot of the 9s that I work with, it is really about that sort of energetic, coming forward quickly, like doing things for me, not just in service of whoever I'm serving. So I do see it. I see the behaviors, and then they reflect the systems that I use, how much money I spend, what my time looks like. I mean, it just really infiltrates into everything.
What's the connection, if there is one, in regards to intuition and the types in somatic experiencing nervous system?
I have come to not be a super huge fan of the word intuition, at least in the way that like Western culture uses it, right? Because is it intuition or is it like trauma, right? Like, I know that sort of spidey sense that I have in my nervous system around like anticipating needs. It's 100% a trauma response around controlling my belonging. And so I think from a more like indigenous spiritual aspect, intuition is from my experiences and the teachers and the folks that I learned from is more about reciprocity with like my guides or my ancestors or my spiritual connections or like the bigger aspects of me and how I am in the world and what that sort of in and out reciprocity might feel like. Less about me as an individual and I just know all the things and more about my connectivity to the earth or to people or my community or my family, and that I mightn't just know what's right for those things. And right's a hard word for me, right? Like, because, you know, what feels in alignment. If I am grounded and present and connected to all of these things, I make choices that are aligned, less than like I have this little voice in my gut telling me these things. So much with the women that I work with, the gut or the voice is an old pattern of trauma.
Wow. And I mean, if you talk about nervous system, in order to be grounded, in order to be present, is a regulated nervous system.
You got it.
That's when you get clarity.
Yep.
And all the
things.
And
the nervous system isn't designed to be regulated all the time. Like
right.
That is not the goal. Homeostasis is not the goal. It's not plausible. It's not possible to be. It's about returning, right? And moving through and getting back to that sense of self. And this is what I think is really cool. Like homeostasis for me as a 7 might be way up here.
Yeah.
I might just have a higher capacity and a higher like output than my sister, who's a very introverted 9.
Yeah.
Where her homeostasis is down here. Neither of us are wrong.
Right. Just different.
Yep. Yeah.
Erin, what does it look like to work with you? Like if you're an entrepreneur or if you're working in corporate and you're like just not doing okay or want to be better, how can people work with you?
I really love working one-on-one. And this is again why like building businesses around who we are is so important, because I can't tell you how many times I've been coached to do coaching programs. You can maximize your time and make more money. And I'm like, but this is what I love. I love the like needling in and really figuring out a person and giving them tools and resources that like make a difference and actually make change. And so that is my favorite thing to do in the world. The vast majority of my work is in one-on-one coaching. I've worked with entrepreneurs and business owners, team leaders for as little as a few sessions to as long. My longest client I've been with for 5 years.
Wow.
And so it really is about where the reciprocity and the need is. But with my one-on-one coaching, we work in buckets of personal development, stress management, nervous system regulation, really getting to know ourselves. We work on professional development, things like boundaries, values, time management, money, and then we go into operational development. How does what we learned about ourselves play into the systems of my business? And why is invoicing hard for me, but this isn't? And really creating operational structures that support how you actually want to work, so you'll show up to it. I love it. I love the work that I do. I'm super privileged and super lucky. So,
yay. Well, I'm like, Erin, we got to get together. Hear all the ways that I'm stuck. So, let's do it. And you also do retreats.
I do. My best friend and I hosted a retreat last year called the Rogue Retreat. We just didn't want to do retreats like anybody else.
Yes.
It is so fun and so gnarly and so different. We are deconstructing pleasure. We are doing boundaries different, how boundaries get held in our body. We are doing lots of reclamation work around our own peace and our own capacity, and we're doing it in community with other like rad, gnarly women. We swear a lot. We Great. Wear our cozy clothes. I mean, it's just so we've set down all of the sort of expectations. And I'm super excited. We launched our second retreat. It'll be in April in 2025 in North Texas at this really awesome, 24-acre property. And all the ladies that came last year are coming again. So we're half sold out already.
Yes. What type is Celeste, the person you do it with?
She fixates as a 9. So our 9 and 7 energy is pretty fun.
Yeah.
And then we had another type 7 join us who did all of the cooking. So all the meals were all home cooked. And
great.
The food was to die for. It was so good.
There's just something about being cooked for as a mother, especially. I'm like, it's the most like receiving, taking care of, feel like just the most nurturing feeling in the world. So I love that.
Yeah, awesome. It was really fun. It blew every expectation I had out of the water. So
yeah,
we're super excited to do it again.
Great. I love it. Okay, so where can people find you? And we'll put that in the show notes too.
Yep. So my website is livingtheenneagram.com, or you can find me on Instagram at livingtheenneagram, which I love to just share fun and accessible things there. And then you can check out the retreat at theroguewomen.com.
The Rogue Women. Okay. Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Erin, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So good to see you.
I know. Tell me more about my type out there. Just kidding. But if you guys are listening and you want to dive deeper, Erin's your girl. Okay? Because I was also like every woman out there who's a therapist or who's in the helping profession or who's a mother. I'm like, oh, I'm a 2. Like literally, Erin came into a group of therapists and we're all like, oh, I'm a 2. And she's like, no, you guys, you are not all 2s. Okay? And then I did my typing session and spoiler alert, we ain't all 2s. So
yeah, but you're a beautiful helping professional. Like your type is perfectly aligned with what you do.
Thank you. But also, if you think you have your type, but you're like, I'm not sure, get a typing interview. Like it's so important. So
it's so fun.
Yeah. Erin, thank you so much.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, bye. Thank you guys for listening to our show. If you are interested in knowing more about your Enneagram type, then reach out to Erin. All of her info is in the show notes. Thank you again for your open ears, minds, and hearts, and we'll see you next time.